Right now, somewhere in the world, a dog is sitting by a window watching the street. Cars pass, strangers walk by, and then you appear, and something shifts. The tail starts moving before you've even opened the gate. But here's the question that should stop you cold. What exactly does that dog think you are? Not my owner, not the person who feeds me. What is the mental category, if there even is one, that an animal places you in when it looks at you? Because the answer, it turns out, is far stranger and far more beautiful than you've ever imagined. For most of human history, we assumed the answer was simple. Animals see us as threats, or as sources of food, or as large, unpredictable objects to be avoided. We drew a clean line between human minds and animal minds, and we stood comfortably on our side of it. But science has spent the last 50 years quietly, methodically, erasing that line. And what researchers have found on the other side is something that should fundamentally change how you look at the animal nearest to you. The first crack in that wall appeared in 1970, when a psychologist named Gordon Gallup Jr. introduced what became one of the most famous experiments in the history of animal cognition. He placed chimpanzees in front of mirrors. At first, they did what most animals do. They treated the reflection as another individual, a stranger, a potential rival. But then something happened. After a few days of exposure, the chimpanzees began to use the mirror to examine themselves. They looked at parts of their own bodies they couldn't see directly. They used the mirror the way you would. Gallup then marked them with a small, odorless dot of paint on their foreheads while they slept. And when they woke and saw their reflection, they reached up not toward the mirror, but toward their own faces. They knew they were looking at themselves. This is called mirror self-recognition. And it matters enormously for our question today. Because a mind that can recognize itself, a mind that has a concept of me, is a mind that can also have a concept of you. Self-awareness and other awareness are two sides of the same coin. If an animal knows it exists as a distinct individual, then it can perceive you as a distinct individual too. Not as a blur, not as a category, as someone. And here's where the list gets surprising. Mirror self-recognition has since been documented in great apes, in dolphins, in elephants, and in one species that will probably make you pause. The Eurasian magpie, a bird. A creature with a brain the size of a walnut that, when researchers placed a mark on its feathers in a spot only visible in a mirror, reached down and tried to touch it. The researchers who published that study in 2008 described it as evidence of a level of self-conception they hadn't expected to find outside of mammals. If you've ever locked eyes with a crow or a magpie and felt something looking back, you were probably right. If the question of what animals think we are is fascinating you, and it should, this channel exists entirely for that question. Every video here goes deep into the inner life of animals and what that inner life means for the bond between them and us. If that's the kind of thing that keeps you up at night in the best way, consider subscribing, because we're just getting started. So, we've established that certain animals have a sense of self, but that's not the same as understanding what you are. Knowing that I exist doesn't automatically tell you what the creature in front of you is. So, how do animals actually classify us? What mental folder do they put us in? Researchers working with great apes have found something genuinely unsettling and wonderful at the same time. Chimpanzees and bonobos don't appear to place humans in a simple predator or not category. Frans de Waal, the primatologist who spent decades studying the emotional and social lives of primates, observed that chimpanzees raised in contact with humans develop what he described as a capacity for reading human social cues that goes far beyond anything their wild counterparts display. They track human gaze. They follow pointing gestures. They notice when you're distracted versus when you're paying full attention. They know when you know something and when you don't. This is called theory of mind, the ability to model what another individual is thinking, and its presence in chimpanzees suggests that when a chimp looks at you, it's not just seeing a body, it's reading you. But here's where it gets strange. Dogs, animals that are not our close relatives, animals that separated from wolves roughly 15,000 years ago are, in some respects, better at reading human social cues than chimpanzees are. A study published in the journal Science in 2002 found that domestic dogs could follow a human pointing gesture to find hidden food, something that even young chimpanzees struggled with. The researchers concluded that dogs have been shaped by thousands of years of living alongside us into something extraordinary, a species that is, in a very real sense, tuned to human communication. They didn't just adapt to survive near us. They evolved to understand us. What do you think your own animal understands about you that you've never given it credit for? Leave a comment below, we'd genuinely love to know, because the answers people share on this channel are often as fascinating as the science, and it goes deeper than gestures. Studies in animal cognition have shown that dogs distinguish between human emotional expressions with a level of consistency that looks a lot like genuine emotional reading. A 2016 study by researchers at the University of Lincoln found that dogs integrated both visual and auditory cues of human emotion. They combined what they saw on your face with what they heard in your voice to form an overall assessment of your emotional state. That is not a reflex. That is a form of perception, a form of attention. When your dog looks at you when you're sad, it may not be waiting for food. It may be doing something far more like what you do when you look at someone you care about. Now, the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed in 2012 by a prominent group of neuroscientists, made something explicit that many researchers had quietly believed for years, that non-human animals possess the neurological substrates that generate conscious states. In plain language, that animals are conscious, that there is something it is like to be them. This echoes the famous 1974 essay by philosopher Thomas Nagel, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? A piece that argued that subjective experience in animals is real, irreducible, and fundamentally impossible to fully access from the outside. You can study a bat's sonar. You cannot know what it feels like to be a bat navigating by sound in the dark. And yet that experience exists. That inner life is real. So the question becomes not just, do animals think, but what is it like to be an animal looking at a human being? And here is where the science gives way to something quieter and more profound. Because the evidence suggests that different animals have built radically different mental models of what we are, and some of those models are more sophisticated, more emotional, and more mutual than we ever suspected. Consider what happened with a chimpanzee named Washoe. In the 1960s and 70s, researchers Alan and Beatrix Gardner taught Washoe American Sign Language, making her one of the first non-human animals to communicate with humans through language. Washoe learned over 300 signs. But what moved researchers most wasn't the vocabulary. It was what she did unprompted. When a researcher named Kat, who had been absent after suffering a miscarriage, returned to Washoe's enclosure, Washoe signed "cry" and then gently touched the tears on Kat's face. She hadn't been told why Kat had been away. She just looked at her, and she knew something was wrong, and she responded to it. Whatever mental category Washoe had for humans, it included the possibility of their pain, and it included the impulse to respond to that pain. And this is the part that science still can't fully explain. Why? Why would a chimpanzee, whose survival doesn't depend on human emotional well-being, develop a response to human grief? Franz de Waal argued that empathy in primates, including their empathy toward humans, is not a learned behavior. It's a biological capacity, older than language, older than culture, wired into a nervous system that evolved in a social world where reading and responding to the emotions of others was a matter of survival. When Washoe reached toward Kat's tears, she wasn't imitating human behavior. She was expressing something that had been there long before humans taught her any signs at all. Now, we reach the part of this story that tends to stay with people. In 2018, an orca named Tahlequah, part of the southern resident killer whale population in the Pacific Northwest, gave birth to a calf that died within 30 minutes. What Tahlequah did next was documented by researchers and observed for 17 days. She carried her dead calf on her rostrum, her forehead, through the water, for over 1,000 miles. Other members of her pod took turns helping carry the calf when she tired. Scientists who study cetacean behavior described it as an unmistakable expression of grief. Prolonged, deliberate, social grief. The kind of grief that requires a concept of loss. The kind of grief that requires knowing that something that was here is now gone, and that it mattered. Why does this matter for our question? Because grief at that level implies attachment. And attachment requires a very specific thing. The recognition of another individual as irreplaceable. Not as a member of a category, as someone specific. Unrepeatable. Tahlequah didn't just lose a calf. She lost that calf. And researchers who study orcas believe, based on documented behavior, on the complexity of orca social structures, on their demonstrated long-term memories, that orcas form individual bonds, including, in some cases, with the humans who study them over decades. There are accounts of specific orcas recognizing specific researchers after years of absence. Not researchers as a category, not humans as a species. Those particular humans, with their particular boats and their particular patterns of movement and sound. So, what do animals think a human is? The honest answer is, it depends on the animal, and it depends on you. A crow in a city that has been treated badly by humans will remember your face specifically, individually, your face, and warn other crows about you. This has been demonstrated in controlled studies at the University of Washington, where researchers wore masks while handling crows and then walked the same routes without masks. The crows scolded the masked face. They ignored the unmasked face. They told each other. They passed the information through their social network. What you did to a crow, even once, became part of its understanding of who you are. You became a specific entity in its world, not just a human, but this human, the one who did that thing. And that might be the most quietly astonishing thing this whole field of research has uncovered. When you look at an animal and wonder if there's someone in there, if there's a mind behind those eyes that perceives and feels and remembers the evidence, increasingly says yes. Not in the way you experience the world, not with your symbols and your language and your ability to think about tomorrow, but with something just as real, something that registers you not as a silhouette or a stimulus, but as a presence, a specific presence, one that can be trusted or feared, recognized or missed. The philosopher Thomas Nagel was right that we can never fully know what it is like to be another creature. But the science suggests we've been asking the wrong question. The question isn't only what it's like to be them, it's also what it's like for them to be near us. And the answer, from crows to chimpanzees, from dogs to dolphins and grieving orcas, is that being near us is something they notice, something they encode, something some of them, in their own particular way, seem to hold on to. You've looked into an animal's eyes and wondered what was there. The wonder, it turns out, was mutual. If this kind of question moves you, if the idea that the animal in your life might hold you as someone specific and irreplaceable touches something real, share this video with someone who feels the same way about animals. And if anything we explored today left a mark on you, a like takes 2 seconds, and it means the world to a channel trying to bring these questions to more people. The animals can't ask you themselves, but maybe that's